Hello and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS. As part of your big news today, we'll be discussing an interesting story coming out of China, which is the mass protests which are happening there. These two things don't go together with regards to how China is a mass surveillance state, and with a lot of press censorship, these protests become very important. Before we begin our discussion for today, as always, we are available on Telegram, so do download the app via the QR code given here or the link in the description below. Further, there's also an important workshop on why civil services, how it is an important career option, and it is on 30th November at 7 p.m. by Chetan sir, and you can register free for this workshop in the link in the description below. With this, let's discuss these protests which are happening in China. And before we go into the nitty-gritty of the topic itself, let's discuss the larger contour here. The larger concept is that China has been coming down on COVID with its strategy called zero COVID strategy. And zero COVID strategy is now technically archaic and outdated, but New Zealand and China were the ones who followed it very religiously. So when we talk about COVID response and state action, we had seen this word called flattening the curve, which is that you make sure that the cases start to flatten and then they fall down. This is based on mitigation. It's about vaccination, it's about mitigation, it's about making sure that there's a point at which we max out at the cases and then it goes down. However, China went the other way, which is not flattening the curve, it's about eliminating the curve, which is to have a sharp decline by controlling the spread itself. But the problem is that COVID-19 is a viral disease, and eliminating viral diseases much like the flu is technically impossible. Unlike New Zealand, which has now given up on the concept of elimination to mitigation, China has been very straight and very strict with this policy till now. With 2 years of zero COVID strategy, now people are coming onto the streets against the harsh realities of these lockdowns and the mass testing which is happening. So hundreds of demonstrators and police clashed in Shanghai over China's stringent COVID restriction. Further, it is very unprecedented that hundreds were seen chanting "Step down Xi Jinping, step down Communist Party." And this is very unprecedented because this is defiance in a country in which censorship and surveillance go together. So against the zero COVID policy, the zero COVID strategy, now people are asking Xi Jinping to step down. This is extremely rare and unprecedented. So many demonstrators have held blank sheets of white paper in what they are calling as silent protests. And this image itself has now become iconic because China and protest don't go together, and these people are risking their lives to come to the streets to technically point out that there is a major resentment and fear which is developing within China itself. So let's try to understand what is the zero COVID policy and zero COVID strategy. The zero COVID strategy is based on three basic principles: mass testing, targeted lockdowns, and travel restrictions. And as I said, it's not about flattening the curve, elimination of the curve itself. So you stamp out outbreaks to the last case and make sure that at any cost no case is left. However, if you look at this strategy, it is unsustainable because it leads to immense hardships on lifestyle and livelihoods of the citizen, and it makes these curbs very unpopular because one after the other, if you have lockdowns every week, it becomes an inconvenience and a problem. So New Zealand and China were seen to have this policy of elimination rather than flattening the curve. New Zealand has given it up. WHO itself has said that in a viral disease it is technically unsustainable. However, China is still pursuing it, saying that we will make the cases zero, which is technically not possible. Therefore, instead of building more ICU units, emphasizing on vaccination, and China historically now has one of the lowest vaccination coverage, it has poured enormous resources in mass testing, lockdowns, isolation facilities to win a war against a virus which can never be won. So basically, China, rather than focusing much like India on vaccination, on mitigation, on flattening the curve, China said that we'll not emphasize on vaccination, rather we'll try to eliminate COVID-19 itself, which is absurd because it's a viral disease. So very simply, the problem is in the strategy itself. However, Xi Jinping or the Communist Party is not ready to give it. But the question is, why is that these protests have now come through? Why is that now there's an output? The trigger for this has technically come from a block fire in Urumqi. Urumqi, what has happened is 10 people have died and 9 have been injured because of a block fire which happened in an apartment complex. But why is it acting like a catalyst? Because the videos are showing that the lockdown measures delayed the firefighters from reaching the victims itself, and basically now there is public anger over the fact that because of the zero COVID policy, because of the restriction, basically the firefighters were not able to save these 10 people. So the outpour comes out. The trigger is basically when people saw that when it comes to emergency situations such as fires, still they are emphasizing on basic lockdown measures and basic protocols. Therefore people are now saying that this is unsustainable, this is unacceptable, and in many parts of the country there have been residents which have torn down their barriers and come to the streets defying the lockdowns, and there is now mass anti-lockdown protests which are happening in Urumqi itself, in parts of Shanghai, and all across China itself. And this is rare for China because we don't know too much about China because of the press censorship which happens there. The social media platforms don't have the freedom which they have in India or in the US itself. So basically now China is in a brink of tipping over, and basically this is something which Xi Jinping cannot cover up. Before we end the session, let's try to understand how it is relevant for your examination. It is relevant for the examination for three very basic reasons. As aspiring UPSC aspirants, we want to become administrators. So you need to see how administrative decisions have an impact on people. So here China has been pursuing a policy which makes no sense in this day and age, is basically unsustainable in the long run also, but still they are pursuing it, which is the zero COVID policy. And the second important aspect here is that China, being a mass surveillance state, being a state which has a lot of press censorship, these protests mean that there is now a growing discontent against the anti-democratic measures of the government, and Xi Jinping, who has been reigning as a dictator itself in China, has now seen some form of resistance from the people. Therefore it is a very important moment in China. So the basic point here is the trigger has been the Urumqi block fire. The COVID-19 restrictions were not, the lockdown restrictions were not even removed for the fire situation. People are now finding these lockdowns pointless, and now the anger is rising in China itself. And at the end of the day, when we talk about China and its strategy, flattening the curve is better than eliminating the curve. Viral diseases cannot be eliminated because of the nature of the disease itself. Therefore, we should actually be extremely proud of the Indian effort, which is that we rather concentrate on vaccination than to go for eliminating the curve. China as of right now has very, very low vaccination coverage. It's trying to protect the older population. However, the strategy has not been to create all the resources to mitigate, but to eliminate. And elimination will not work here. So with this, I would like to end the session. Thank you so much. I will see you in the next video. Take care. Bye-bye.